The book, or in my view, my perception of politics, has to do with three major factors, and each of them is pretty difficult. Number one, it may seem easy, but it's not, is to go into our hearts and say, what's going on in the world that we live? And often what is going on in the world that we live is not what you see on the television or read in the newspaper. Quite the contrary. In my country, and obviously I'm a lot more familiar with the economics and politics of the United States than the UK, but in my country today, over 60% of the American people live paycheck to paycheck. Do you all know what that means, paycheck to paycheck? My brother, who is here someplace, and I grew up in a family that lived paycheck to paycheck. And what it means in America today is that people go out and they work, and often they work hard, and often they work long hours. But at the end of that week, when they get their paycheck, there is nothing left. And if during that week their automobile breaks down, they may not have the money to get the car fixed and get to work. If you can't get to work, you get fired, and then you have no income. Unlike the UK, we do not have a national health care system, and if somebody gets sick, the medical bill may be very high. And people then living paycheck to paycheck have to decide literally whether they go to the doctor, or they take their kids to the doctor, or not. And we have some 500,000 Americans every year who go bankrupt with medically related bills. And if somebody ends up in the hospital and gets a bill for $100,000, many people can't pay that off, and they go bankrupt as a result. In America, rents are going up for working people in many communities throughout the country. And if you're paying a certain amount and you're just getting by, and your landlord says, well, sorry, we got to raise your rent by 25%, well, you can't afford it. What do? Well, you have to move, go from one apartment to another, and what happens to your child who is in school in the neighborhood? Well, your child has got to get up, got to go into a new school, readjust, and it's kind of hard on the child. Living paycheck to paycheck today, whether it's the UK or the United States, is enormously stressful. And one of the points we make in the book, which we do not talk about often enough, in America, our life expectancy, when you talk about what is our goal as human beings, what do we all want to do? And by and large, most of us want to live long and happy and productive lives, right? Nobody wants to die young. Nobody, wants to sit in front of a TV set their entire lives. Nobody wants to be miserable. Some of us are, but that's not what we want. We want long, happy, and productive lives. But in my country right now, and this is before COVID, COVID has taken its terrible toll all over the world. We've lost over 1 million Americans. Before COVID, life expectancy in the United States was less than in most other industrialized countries. And in many parts of America, life expectancy before COVID has gone down. Why is that? Well, what the doctors tell us is that people are dying from diseases of despair. You all know what that means? Anybody know what that means? What diseases of despair are about has everything to do with hopelessness. So if somebody had a good job, so you worked in a factory and you're making good wages, and that factory shuts down, maybe it goes to China, maybe it just shuts down for whatever reason, and you get another job at half or 2/3 of the wages. If you can't afford health care, if you can't afford to send your kid to college, if you are worried that your children, and by and large in the United States today, in general, the younger generation will have a lower standard of living than their parents. And you look around and you say, my life is going nowhere. My kids' lives may be worse than my life. I am going to take to the bottle. I'm going to drink a lot. So we see a whole lot of people becoming addicted to alcohol, become alcoholics. We are seeing ferocious, horrendous numbers in terms of drugs in the United States. We lost over 100,000 Americans last year from overdoses. And addiction in the United States is a very, very serious problem, which we are struggling now to figure out how to deal with. And in addition to drug addiction and alcohol addiction and tobacco addiction, we are looking at increases in suicide and suicidal ideation. And COVID has, for a variety of reasons, made a bad situation much worse. But it was there even before COVID. So in the midst of an economy in which we are seeing working class families struggling, and over 60% living paycheck to paycheck, we are also seeing another phenomenon. And that is the people on top in the United States have never, ever had it so good. There is today more income and wealth inequality in America today than has ever existed before. Now, we don't talk about it a lot. And one of the points of this book is not just to talk about those issues, but to try to explain why we don't talk about those issues. Because maybe the major crisis that we face is not all the crises we know, but the fact that we're not dealing with the crisis. We're shoving them aside for particular reasons. In any case, in America today, quite unbelievably, I think, and outrageously, 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society. The top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 92%. When I was growing up a few years ago in America, George Washington's time, George and I worked together. CEOs, there's nothing new about the fact that the owners of companies make more money than their workers. Nothing new. That's always been the case. But back then, 70, 80 years ago, the gap between the CEO, the head of the company, and the worker was about 20 to 1. The guy who ran the company made 20 times more money than the average worker. And over the years, that gap has grown wider and wider and wider. And now in America, the head of the large corporations make 400 times more than the average employer in that corporation. Everybody knows that in America people are angry, and you see, I'm sure, on the television manifestations of that anger. But one reason that people are angry is that if you are a worker in America, you really, in terms of wages and income, have gone almost nowhere in the last 50 years. And here is an astounding fact which is not talked about terribly much. And that is, in the last 50 years, as all of you know, there has been a revolution in technology. I was mayor of the city of Burlington in 1981. That's when I was elected. I served through 1989. When I walked into City Hall as mayor, there were no computers. None. There were no printers. There certainly was no email at all. So there has been a revolution over the last 40, 50 years in technology, which has made every worker in the United States and the UK significantly more productive. And yet, despite that increase in productivity, today, the weekly wage for the average American worker in inflation-adjusted dollars is less than it was 50 years ago. Got that? Great increase in productivity. In real inflation accounted for dollars, people are earning less. There was a study done by the Rand Corporation, which is certainly not a left-wing group. And what they said is that over the last 50 years in America, there has been a $50 trillion redistribution of wealth from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. So what we are looking at is a country in which the people on top have never had it so good. The middle class is shrinking. The working class is struggling. And at the bottom of the ladder, we have in America today over 500,000 people who are homeless.